Good afternoon, everyone. I am apparent Ron Weasley impersonator Tim here with Robot But Recommends. It is March 89th and day of quarantine. So, what do we have in store for us today? I have been tossing and debating whether or not I wanted to make today's recommendation for a couple of different reasons. The recommendation is House of Leaves by Mark C. Danielewski. And the reason I was hesitant was partly because a story that involves a house that is constantly changing and fucking with you might seem a little too real in a time when everyone is getting a little stir-crazy and feeling cooped up in their own homes. And two, it was very well received when it first came out, but it has gotten a little bit of backlash and a reputation of being one of those books that people say are their favorite and really like in order to seem really clever and smart and iconoclast. And I can kind of see why, because like all of Mark C. Danielewski's books, there is a bit of a gimmick to it in the way the font and everything is laid out. However, I do not think that takes away from the story itself, especially in this example. All of the kind of weird layouts and gimmickiness really plays into the story, I feel. So, about the story, part of the other reason is I was hesitant about whether or not I wanted to recommend this is it is a bit of a long-winded thing to try and explain even briefly. It's kind of a Russian nesting doll of narratives in a very strange way. So the book is presented as a manuscript found by a character named Johnny Truant, who has put everything together. And the manuscript is about a documentary that doesn't exist. And the documentary is about a famous photographer who moves into a new home, and him and his family discovering that the house has unusual qualities, let's say, hallways that go on longer than they should, constantly changing corridors, all that kind of stuff. Holes that just keep going down and down and down and down. So most of the book is that manuscript with footnotes by the character Johnny as he's going through all of this manuscript that he found in an apartment. And his own story plays parallel to the manuscript as he starts to essentially go crazy. And then in addition to that, there are footnotes to the footnotes from the editors who presented the version of the book you are reading. That's kind of a lot just in terms of trying to explain the basic premise of a story. But once you start getting into it, it is a very engaging book, and partly because that gimmicky layout that I mentioned at the beginning forces you to really pay attention to how and what you're reading the story. You can't just skim and kind of lose track of where you are on the page. Like it requires very active reading, and it's something that is fairly labor intensive in terms of reading a book. I think the effort is worth it. That opinion can differ, and I can understand why that opinion would differ. But it's one of my favorite books because of that engrossing nature. The first time I read the book was right when Superstorm Sandy hit. So it was Halloween night. We had lost power, and I'm in bed reading this book by candlelight, and I was freaking out a little bit. It is, in a sense, a horror story. That's not the only aspect to it, but it can get very, very creepy. Horror is subjective, so some people will come away and say, well, it's not scary at all. My brother is one of those people. But reading it by candlelight on Halloween as a storm just came through, I was constantly eyeballing the corners of my room and watching the shadows as they were flickering on the wall, going, okay, what's happening? So it is a very, very cool, very unusual book. Just to give you an example of what I mean about intensive layout, this is just a section kind of towards the middle of the first part. So it is not something that you just pick up as a beach read, and that can scare people away, and that's also why there's a bit of a reputation of people enjoying this book because they're pretentious. But I genuinely do love it. It's not something that I would necessarily recommend to anyone or everyone, but if this sounds like something that is up your alley or something that intrigues you, definitely go check it out. The one drawback is because of all that layout stuff, this is not a book that you can really download like a Kindle or an ebook for. I'm honestly not even sure if ebooks of this exist. You really do need the physical copy to go through all the footnotes and the different ways the book is presented. So you would definitely need to order or track down a physical copy. That is the best way to read it. And if you're feeling really immersive, I wonder if that's what Kelsey James is suggesting here with their Spotify link. There is a bit of a companion album to the book Haunted by the artist Poe. Kelsey James, I'm going to assume that's what this is. I'm having trouble copying and pasting the link from Restream here. But it is an album by Marcy Danielewski's sister, and they're kind of meant to be companion pieces. So if you really want to immerse yourself, pull that album up on Spotify and give that a listen as you're reading the book. I did that when I reread it this past Halloween, and it's pretty fun. But that is the recommendation for this weekend, for this Thursday, March 89th. I hope you guys are having a good week. We've been having some pretty decent weather out here. Hopefully you're able to get outside a little bit in a safe way and get out of the house that way. But I hope you guys all enjoy your weekend. Check out this book, seriously. It's one of my favorites. I actually have 2 copies of it because my first copy I ended up getting signed by the author, so now no one's allowed to read that, and I had to get a second read copy. So yeah, check the book out. Enjoy the weekend, and we will be back next week with some more recommendations. Have a good one.